Welcome to Daddy's Podcast.
This is the Redefining Plastics Podcast. Welcome to the Redefining Plastics Podcast. My name's Justin Riney. This one has been a long time in the works. Mostly my fault. I'm going to throw that out there first and foremost. But Rick Demko. Rick's been in the industry for a while, and he knows where the bones are buried. And the guys at Brave have been on me ever since I started working with them. You got to talk to Rick. You got to talk to Rick. You got to talk to Rick. If you want to have any kind of a serious discussion about recycling, where it's going and how we can make it better, Rick's the guy to talk to. So with that said, Rick, welcome to the show. Appreciate having you.
Thanks, Justin. I appreciate the opportunity as well. We got a lot of work to do, and hopefully I can offer up some information that might have some value for the audience. And hopefully we can continue all this momentum heading in the right direction.
Awesome. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background, who you are, kind of how long you've been in the industry, all that good stuff.
Okay. So currently here at Polyflex Knee Fab, I'm in Farmington Hills, Michigan. Prior to coming over in October 23, I pretty much managed a mechanical recycling facility that was for over the course of 17 years. So I know it sounds like forever, but what it really gave me was, and what I came away with was a real clear understanding of recycling when it didn't matter. And now carrying that knowledge into the torrent that we're in right now and the knowledge gap, and trying to address the best way to fast track more success stories than people that are wanting to fight the plastics industry. There's a lot of benefits. Like I say, over that 17 years, staying profitable through the crash in 2009, staying profitable through being deemed essential during COVID. I mean, you learn a lot, and your scars are wisdom, and carrying that forward now, I think has a huge benefit, because there's a huge knowledge gap and a lot of lessons to be learned and shared.
Yeah, I could not agree anymore with any of that. So I want to jump right into the meat of the discussion, but I asked everybody that comes on this show the same question. What do you think of when you hear the word plastic?
Probably misunderstood.
Okay.
And
it's a good one.
And the reason why I say that is because there are several people like myself, Chris DeArmit, and others in our industry that literally we spend and can really get wrapped up hours per day debunking all the clickbait negativity that's swirling around the internet on different platforms and whatnot. And really, one of my last comments that I made to somebody that was actually kind of calling me out on one of the platforms, I said, okay, so you're anti-plastic. That's clear. And that's fair. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. But I would like you to carry that same opinion when we're talking about prosthetics, computers, fashion, like you name it. Like, if you're really prepared to smear plastics and say that it's basically the devil, are you prepared to live without it? And I would beg to say that most answers, if they're being honest, would be no. So,
well, you would hope, is that person,
right.
If they ever need any sort of life-saving intervention, they say, no, it's against my religion to take plastics. Like, yeah, that wouldn't be very good.
Right. Well, I feel like a lot of those posts and comments that you see, I think current generations have fallen more in love with monetization than misinformation. Mm-hmm. I think they're really willing to kick the bee's nest in order to get, 1,000 or 5,000 or however many clicks in order to monetize, which is really bad, because there's a lot of people that are very easily influenced by misinformation. And, I think the more we can get education out there and really not just profess, but demonstrate how there's huge benefits, financial. Years ago, I always used to fight the argument of return on investment. I always used to joke and say that recycling used to be like working out. Like it always sounds like a great idea. And then when you actually feel the pain of it, nobody wants to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But now on the manufacturer side, just, when you can take an opportunity of scrap, within, a scrap offering, and you can land that material back at the press for 50% savings, and you're talking about, let's say, PCABS, for example, that, you're going to spend, $1.95 a pound for it, let's say, for round numbers. And when you can land that at the press for $1 a pound, now you're saving all that money. That puts you in a phenomenal position to be, be able to offer value, price lever, however you want to, define it. It's just the opportunities are just immense. And, it's, I think with the renewed, let's say newfound momentum in our industry that's never been, this is like the moment to capitalize and really bring the message to the masses, because now we have a captive audience.
Yeah. So when we first jumped on here, we kind of already started down the path of war stories and kind of different things that we're going through when we're talking about defending plastics. So I've got an op-ed that's probably going to be published by the time this episode publishes. That's going to be on Plastics News about changing how we talk about our products and getting more aggressive in messaging in a positive way, not necessarily a negative, but actually talk about the benefits of plastics and why we use plastics, which I've been talking about a lot. So I'm excited about that. But I know as soon as that publishes and as soon as that hits LinkedIn, I'm going to get hammered by NGOs. And that's fine. Perfectly fine. I get it. It's part of playing the game, right? Like if you put yourself out there, you're going to get negative feedback. But I think that you are dead on. We are in a position right now where there's one of two outcomes are going to happen. Either we as an industry all come together and really capitalize on this, or plastics aren't going to be around in the way that we know them in 10 years. Because once they get rid of polystyrene and then they're going to go after polypropylene, then it's going to be polyethylene. And then there's no plastics left, at least no plastic production in the US, because it's too expensive. It would be way too expensive to manufacture. So with all of that being said, you and I are out and about a lot. We talk to a lot of people. We're at a lot of events. We run into people that are very anti-plastics. And then under the guise of trying to make the situation better, sometimes they make it worse. Sometimes they are not in tune with what's needed to make recycling work. So in your mind, how do we make recycling work in the US? Like if we're just talking big, broad strokes, we're not talking, hey, we got to talk about every single project and every single material, but just high level, how does this whole thing work?
I think one of the most important places to start is to establish a standard, clear message. I think the problem is that here domestically in the United States, even if you get down to brass tacks and even the understanding of what a post-consumer and post-industrial relationship is, because I think there's a lot of people that want to participate. I really think there is. And I think that there are, like I had said, there's lots of opportunities, I think, that we can see at the corporate level. But if you're looking at the high volume, low hanging fruit in a lot of this, I think we need to establish a clear standard messaging that gives us a baseline of at least having us all speaking the same language. You talk about like things that end up in the curbside bin that don't belong. To me, and there's lots of people that say, oh, well, that's another example of how it's not working. Well, but look a little deeper. That's somebody who is wanting to participate. But to me, the education and the messaging isn't there.
Yes.
They they want to participate and they want to do this. They're just not informed.
They're running in the wrong direction.
Exactly. And that's part of the problem that I have with EPR right now, with how it's happening in different states. Because let's say hypothetically, 5 years from now, you've got 50 different EPR standards. How is anybody expected to navigate that, right? Like, this needs to be something that's handled at the federal level that establishes the baseline for all participation. Because right now, what we have is a very disjointed system. Most recyclers are still, they exist by, privatized financing. Like, people that are, that see an opportunity, invest in machinery, and try and capitalize on it.
And it's regional because 100%. The opportunities are regional.
100%. Like here in Metro Detroit, this is basically like dunnage capital of the world. So when you get in with the big OEMs and you get into their bid lists and whatever, you're looking at knockdown bins, thermoform trays, polypro hand totes, like all of the standard fare that comes with that. But that's not going to exist and be as saturated in, let's say, the desert Southwest or Southeast. It's still very scattered and spread out. And like I say,
9,500 plus municipal codes that are dictating recycling in the U.S. alone.
Right.
And it's all because of that regionality. And that makes it tough. Like, how do you standardize that when PCABS doesn't even really exist in, we'll call it the deep South? Like around me, it kind of does because there's manufacturing of cars over in Greenville, that area. But like beyond that, PCABS is hit or miss. But then do you make that part of the overarching EPR system that starts at federal? Like, it gets complicated, right? Like, there's so much to it.
It certainly does. And that's what I like about the strategy that like Republic is taking, where they're having polymer centers. So in the grand scheme of things, you and I are very much the same. We don't like to get into semantics as much as we like to just get into what is the goal and how do we keep it out of the landfill. Yeah. We're looking at asset recovery, right? So if we're looking to, and it almost feels like between who I'm dealing with in Europe and here, it's almost like you have inverse problems. Like here we have this torrent going to the landfill and we're trying to figure out how to recover as much as we can of the good stuff out of the stream, right? Whereas in Europe, it seems like their volumes are far less, but they have much better participation rates. But the thing about it is you've only got so much volume that all the big fish are competing over. So if you're let's say the equivalent of like a tier 3 or a mom and pop shop, you'll never compete for secondary. You got to pay so much for it because now, and I just read an article on this, the big dogs over in Europe are writing blanket POs where they're solidifying streams for months on end. So for the small manufacturer, good luck. Yeah. Whereas here, at least, we have all of these resources that are available. They're just heading to the wrong place. So how do we collectively tighten up the filter and figure out how we can keep MRFs profitable? Because if we get too good with some of these things, like I was talking to a gentleman who's one of the management in Balcones, and he says, look, if too much meat comes off my bone, how do I survive? So again, it's that disjointed, segmented, everybody trying to survive mentality. And I think we need to figure out how to really connect dots and pull everybody together so we're a functioning network versus independent people competing for something that we can make money on and keep our doors open.
Yeah. And we got to make sure the end markets are there when we're doing 100%. All of this. Because if we don't look at the whole picture, we could sort, we can recycle, we can do all of that, but it's got to go somewhere. It has to go back into the marketplace. And right now, that seems to be where a lot of people are struggling, getting material out of their dock because of where the market is right now, just overall economy picture.
Right.
How do we solve that? Do we need legislation to include recycled content? And by recycled content, I don't necessarily mean PCR versus PIR, like just recycled content?
Well, I mean, I think that, and we're actually stepping up with our own internal studies, is I think it's a confidence problem. I think that a lot of times when people think in terms of secondary, they don't quite fully understand that thermoplastics, I mean, unless they are grossly mismanaged, typically don't degrade, can be ground down and go right back into a new product. And I hate is a strong word, but I'm really turned off by the people that say that they're so linear in their view. Like it's like they have this programming in their mind that says a bottle has to become a bottle in order for it to be successful, or a tote needs to become a tote. Like when you say circular, they literally picture a circle, and the victory is not in necessarily something becoming exactly what it was as much as it is just recovering the feedstock, period. But I think there's lots of things that can be instrumental, but like say internally, what we're doing is we're running a regrind concentration study. So that way we're looking at 33, 66, 100%, and then collecting data to prove that we're not creating an inferior product when you're using good, recycled content. It's nothing to be afraid of. I think those that say, well, it's downcycled or how many heat passes before the molecules fall apart, things like that. If you're, again, and that's getting pretty scientific and high level, but I think the more people can see and you can put data behind results instead of saying, well, just trust me, it'll be fine. That only goes so far. And when you're talking about, dunnage fleets that, could be in excess of $1 million, it just makes packaging engineers really nervous. The ones that are buying and are wanting these fleets to perform the best they can. They don't like that kind of change, and this is why, we really see, and it's probably going to be at least a 6-month to year-long study, because we're doing several different grades, several different designs, and that way we can at least arm our salespeople with data that proves, it's nothing to be afraid of. And
is that going to be for internal use, or are you going to make that publicly available?
It's going to be for internal use. I think it's specifically targeting our product catalog. I'm sure eventually a lot of the bigger players in the platform that we're on with LinkedIn and whatnot, APR and others, are going to start coming out with their own studies, because eventually, like I say, this like a 30% recycled content is going to be mandated at some point. And I think, engineers are going to be the first level of those concerned about potentially an inferior product. But I think eventually, the consumer is going to want to see this data too, because I think that's another thing with quality of material. If you're talking about food contact and some of these other things, people want to make sure it's safe. I think that's the other part of it.
And if we get into the safety discussion, that brings you into a whole other discussion about microplastics and additives. And additives, like I talked about it last week, there are not as many additives in plastics as NGOs are throwing out there. But what I really wanted to focus on next, you mentioned circularity. So circularity is a buzzword right now. Everybody's throwing it around. What I find interesting is we're having different conversations depending on the product. I don't hear anybody talking about circularity of paper. Mm-hmm. How many times do you think that OCC is going to go straight back into new cardboard? Very rarely. It's getting downcycled, folks. And it's not a problem, though. I don't even think that's a bad thing, because the fibers are going to break down over time. I came out of the paper industry. You can only recycle paper so many times. Glass. Is anybody talking about, hey, is that bottle going directly back into a bottle, or did it go into a window or stained glass or whatever? No, nobody's having that discussion. But when plastics are involved, it has to be, this PET water bottle has to become a PET water bottle. It can't become strapping. It can't become anything else. Like, I've got 4 rocking chairs in my backyard that are all made out of PCR HDPE.
Mhm.
And I love them. And I'm going to keep those things forever. People would consider that downcycling. I don't. I think that is a great use for plastics that's keeping it out of a landfill. And I forget the exact number of the amount of milk jugs in each of those, but that's a huge deal. Let's do more of that. Why is that a problem? And so
Exactly.
Any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, it's again, it's one of those things where, when they talk about landfill diversion, one of the strongest arguments is, and again, I think there's times where, every time I go to a conference, I'm really hoping that nobody recognizes me from LinkedIn because I'm waiting to get shoved down some stairs or something. But, again, I think it's almost like keeping score too closely. Like, again, it's losing sight of what the goal is. And a lot of the people that are posting different things that are attacking plastics are saying, like, one recent one was, it's going to take, 100 years for this to degrade. It's going to take 500 years for that. It's like, okay, like, A, where's your science? B, I mean, really, nobody's going to debate that. So they're really just queuing in on emotions. They're trying to get people to, focus on, they're taking their eyes off the ball. We have ways that we can all be better. And the other thing that really kind of smears the effort is everybody, now that recycling is important and circularity, is we're all focusing forward. We can't go back into the past. Like, now that I'm on the manufacturing side and I'm seeing what the average lifespan is of our fleets that are in service, you're talking 7 to 10 years. So these are linear designs, just like I was facing back at the recycling plant that I'm facing now. But the difference is that I can help guide on a broader scale. I can say, okay, we've got a fleet that popped up in Monterrey, Mexico. This is who you go to. Or I can say, you've got a fleet that popped up in Santa Clara, California, or we stumbled across this material tying up space in a warehouse for the last however many years. This is who you go to.
Connecting the dots for people.
Exactly. And those are, initially the vision of me coming over was to focus on closing the loop on just our product. But what was the unforeseen was, as soon as our customers heard that, Polyflex has a guy, everybody went into garage sale mode and they were looking for solutions on everything. And to me, as a recycler for so long, it's like heaven. Like, you finally can help on a grander and greater scale than just 1 or 2 truckloads of material. I mean, when I came over, I was in the first 60 days, and I thought it was kind of a joke, is I had 60 truckloads to try and find homes for, and did it. And it was a lot of effort, a lot of networking, and just goes to show how impactful we all can be by helping connect these dots and closing up these loops and showing customers and whatever the relationship is, that recycling can work. Just give it a chance, consult with the professionals, and then, from there, these are universal tools that work anywhere in any region. That's the other beautiful part about circularity and recycling.
I think the big issue is there are very few Rick Demkos running around. And so there are very few people that have the Rolodex to solve a lot of those problems. And it's not like we can just copy you and make 60 of you and send you all across the country and solve problems. How do we scale that with tribal knowledge being the way it is in recycling, and knowing where the bones are buried and knowing where the end markets are? That's not exactly something that you can institute. That's something where you need relationships to do. How do we solve for that gap?
Well, I think, when you can, instead of when a company reaches out and says, hey, I had this material, I need to try and get it recycled, responsibly or whatever. I think the more that we can share, like, the nuts and bolts of exactly how that happens. So, like, say, for example, and now you got to kind of use your imagination here, but if you can envision like a thermoformed HMW PE tray that has TPU details in it, which are like obviously like you would know this, a soft contact point for parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So from a recycler standpoint, that's cross contamination.
Yeah, with the TPU specifically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with the way that it's fastened, which is basically like the Christmas tree stem on the back where you drill a hole through the thermoform, pop it in, and that's what holds it in its location. Now, from a recycler's standpoint, what you're going to do is you're going to look at, okay, I need to get that TPU and that HDPE separated. How am I going to do that? You're going to say, okay, it's going to happen one of two ways, either manual labor, which can be very expensive depending on how many contact points there are, or B, I'm going to do that through automation, which means I'm going to grind it together, call it a wash grade, and then I'm going to density separate PE and TPU because you've got one with a density over one with a density under one.
So sink float system.
100%. And that's something that has a very, very high level of accuracy. So once you get those two items apart from each other, now you're looking at, okay, can I use the HDPE back into my product? Can I use the TPU back into my product? What are my options as far as, whether it be scrap brokerage or, then you kind of go into the marketing aspect of it. But I think the more that we can guide our customers instead of just flat solving problems, I think now that these companies are getting sustainability on staff, so you actually have somebody that you can talk mano with and walk through these. I think the more we can offer clarity as to how this happens and how it can make sense. And then I think really that's kind of the catalyst. That can be the catalyst. Now you'll have companies that are looking for opportunities within, especially when times are tough, because sometimes those can be like the hidden gems where, you can take something that was sitting in an aux warehouse somewhere and capitalize on it instead of it just being a lost asset that just, is sitting somewhere collecting dust.
Yeah, I think you touch on a valid point here that I want to dig into a little bit more. I think when there's money involved in solving these problems, let's say you're a broker and somebody comes to you with something to solve, you're going to keep those relationships close to the vest and you're not going to connect them directly because then that is lost revenue for you. The revenue is actually making the entire value chain more expensive. So, and don't get me wrong, I think brokers serve a valuable purpose in the industry in some instances. But I do think there's something to be said about having a Rick Demko on staff in an organization like yours, solving problems for customers that's not necessarily in your wheelhouse. It's not something that you're going to want to get involved in, but you can connect your customer to the person that could do that for them. That way you keep money out of the system or increase margin, increase whatever, and then you can keep it cheaper. And then you're providing a service for your customer, which then is going to lead to repeat business on what your core business is. Because that's what I do too, to be completely transparent. I solve problems for people all the time that have nothing to do with polystyrene or ABS or any of it. They'll call me and like, hey, I've got like skeleton scrap off of a polypropylene thermoform. I have no idea where to go. I am in Atlanta, Georgia. They're like, well, I know 5 guys right around there that'll take that tomorrow. Here are all of their names, all their numbers, figure out who's going to give you the best price, and then go. Perfect. I didn't have to get involved. I wasn't a broker. I just connected them to a couple different people for them to talk to. And hopefully that means the problem is solved. And that's more material being diverted from landfill. I think what we need is almost a consultant in each of our companies that can solve that. My issue has always been there's a lot of people in sustainability or recycling roles within plastics that don't really know recycling. I think that's the difficulty. Like they never had to live it. They didn't run out of material and then have to find something. And then you have to call everybody that you know. And then through that, you make a ton of connections and then you know all the players.
But and to prove your point, so like you could say, let's use expandeds as an example. So if I was to go up to somebody, let's call it a sustainability guy that's just maybe fresh out of school or whatever, new to the game, fresh into the industry. The first thing that a recycler that's been around the block as many years as I have, whenever you hear expandeds, what's the biggest hurdle that you always have to address that is typically the killer is freight.
It's loose. It's light. And
yes, you're shipping,
transport it. Yeah.
You're transporting air, right? So now you go into your toolbox and you think to yourself, what are my options? Who's the closest densifier? Would they be willing to put in a densifier? Yeah. What kind of densifier would they even consider? I mean, and this is where you kind of go into your toolbox where you develop what the strategy is, what your solution options are, and then you figure out which is the best way to go on this. And I've had plenty, like you say, I don't want to necessarily say loss leader, but I've been tasked with projects before where cost avoidance is the win.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a rebate check. That's the other thing that I try and profess regularly is that it's the win is not always in the form of a check. And actually a project that I did for a big auto OEM, I spent just a couple, handful of hours on it, and it recovered 2.1 million pounds back to the polypropylene pipeline and changed the category from incineration to actually recycled.
And it's not cheap to incinerate this stuff. It's not cheap to landfill this stuff.
And
you can save money by just giving it to a recycler.
Yeah.
And
I came across somebody, kind of had to do some back channeling through some networking. And that was kind of interesting because actually what I did was I kind of back channeled through some equipment manufacturers and said, hey, you got anybody down in SEC country? This is I've got this stream and just, they're not all going to work out that way, but literally, saving that much back to the pipeline and about, roughly $500,000 is, that does move the needle, especially, but what I came away with though, is just even more of an understanding of how OEMs and others that have these expendable streams or whatever the waste stream is, it's not their profit center to come up with these solutions. So there's a total and complete disconnect, not by negligence, purely by that's not what they're hired for.
Yeah.
They're hired to help design product, whether it be a car or whatever it is. And, the waste streams in their eyes are just exactly that. They're waste streams. But anybody from the recycling industry over the last however long when plastics, let's say late 80s on through till now, we see resources and we see opportunities. And, like I say, I was able to save somebody a lot of money in that situation, but I didn't charge them anything because my ethics and moral side said, I'm not going to save somebody a bunch of money only to turn around and charge them.
And so you're not going to start the Rick Demko consultancy firm?
100% not.
Yeah, I'm not either. Just to be clear. It's just the right thing to do.
100%.
Solving problems for people is the right thing to do.
Correct.
Because our industry already gets a bad rap. People think that we're just out for money and we don't really care about the environment or people. I disagree with all of that vehemently. I disagree with all of that.
Right.
I care a lot about our people in this industry, which is why I do this podcast. I do this podcast because there are people that are producing EPS in Illinois right now that are possibly under threat because of a law that doesn't make any sense. That's why I do this, because there are lots of people out there that don't have a voice, that really are just trying to make a living for their family, and misinformation is leading to them possibly losing their job. So I think what that brings us to is the legislative discussion. So as we jumped on here, we talked about, I spent some time in Illinois last week talking to legislators about SB 1531, which is a foam food service ban for polystyrene in Illinois. It looks like it may not pass, but you never know until the end of the cycle.
Right.
But so there's that kind of stuff going on where I'm out there and all I have to do is sit down with any legislator and tell them the facts, because they haven't been told the facts. They've been handed a document that says styrene is causing cancer. It is a huge waste stream. And when I tell them, it's like less than 0.1% of what's found on beaches. What are we talking about here? And if you move from this, you go from 98% air to 100% of something else. You're just moving from one plastic to another. What's the point? What is the point of all this other than virtue signaling? So, yeah, it's a challenge. It's a struggle. It gets very frustrating when you're talking and you're having the same conversation over and over again. But you have to do it because you have to educate these people, because I hope they're trying to make the best decision for their constituents, and they're not just doing things because of whatever personal motivation.
Right.
So you recently went to a conference where you were working on some big ideas, EPR being one of them. Like, how do you institute EPR to make it truly work? What was your experience like there? Like, what did you run into? What were your key takeaways?
Well, I think the key takeaways were that there's a lot of different opinions and a lot of mixed messages. And I think when you really boil it all down, I think to those outside the space that, I think one of their biggest concerns is that it's going to, it boils down to money, the expense, they see dollar signs. And I like the analogy of, the difference between dropping a water bottle and dropping a credit card. They're both plastic, but the only difference is one's worth money and the other one's not. Or it represents money.
It represents money, yeah.
Correct. Mm-hmm. So in Michigan, we've had bottle deposits for aluminum cans and whatnot forever. And I'm really hoping that they start with something that can work or has proven to work, expand it, and then let the benefits kind of gain momentum. I think the problem is that when you start to put yourself in a position where government is looking like it's trying to control you and change your life or your life's habits, I think that's when you get a lot of pushback. And, people don't want to change their life. I mean, it's hard enough to survive as it is. I mean, let's be honest.
Positive incentives are much better than outright bans.
Exactly. So like if I said, hey, I'm going to ban all this stuff, and even though it makes your life a living hell, trust me, I'm deciding what's best for your life and your health. People are going to be like, no way. But if I can say, look, I'm expanding a bottle deposit on water bottles, and this is where these are the resources that I feel that can be generated. And then I show a handful of, let's say, youth sports organizations that are always fighting for funding. And they can say, oh, well, you know what? We had a bottle drive for this school and that school or this baseball league or whatever else. And you see them, recovering hundreds, if not thousands of bottles, and that money being injected directly into those youth programs. That's a success story.
Yeah.
Now, see, that's something that people can relate to, and they can say, okay, well, heck, if there's going to be that kind of a life benefit, then I don't mind paying for it. And I'd much rather support something positive like youth athletics that way than have to buy a candle I don't want, or something from some fundraiser that is, some that people feel like they have to, participate in. So I think as long as you can show, what the benefits are, how you can connect with your community, things of that nature, I think that's just the better way to go, as opposed to telling people how you're going to change their life.
Yeah.
And that's always my message is, baby steps equal, big change, more sustainable change.
The one thing that I've noticed in my time going through and working on the advocacy side, half the time it's one NGO or an industry person having these conversations. And what you find is neither of them really know anything about how all of this system works. And they don't even have insights on how to make it better because they don't understand how it works in the first place. And so they institute laws thinking, well, this has to make it better. Like New Jersey bag ban. Great example. They saw bags floating around in the environment. Horrible. We don't want that. And nobody wants that. So they figure the easiest way to get rid of it, let's just ban the bags. And then what happens? Everybody needs reusable bags. And then you increase plastic consumption for bags in New Jersey by 40% year over year. Year one, it went up by 40%. I don't even know what that number is year two. It's a mess. Because whoever was in charge of making that law was so disconnected from the realities on the ground, and they didn't have the right people to direct them to make these things work. And that's my biggest concern with all of this legislation that's floating around right now. California SB 54, another good example. They're looking for 30% recycle rates on everything into California. How many things do you know of that have a 30% recycle rate in the US? There's like 3 things that I know of.
Yeah. Well, and a key indicator of that is, according to Closed Loop Partners, recycled content and the demand that would, based on what they're wanting to have put into new packaging going forward. Right now, we only have enough in the pipeline to support 6% of the demand.
Yeah.
So how in the heck is somebody going to come forth with the rules that we need to have 30% recycled content in all this packaging when we're not even in double-digit percents of support? I mean, it's like those that are making the rules are so caught up with ownership of said rules that they're not even willing to lean into those that I would consider industry experts that have all the information that can help shape sustainable change, like say in small increments, as opposed to literally trying to inflict damage on all these companies to try and jump, because that's what you're setting yourself up for is failure.
Yeah.
Because you look at some of these big companies that rolled out these big projections and said, I'm going to do this by this year.
I was in packaging when all of this was happening, by the way. So,
yes. And there's nothing worse than putting a projection out there and then having to walk it back. You've just now lost all credibility. You've given the naysayers an aha moment, and it just takes all of us back so many steps.
Yeah.
Because now, like I say, and I won't name names, we all know them, but it's just, it hurts everyone, and unfortunately, it just enables those who don't want to participate, because we all know it works and we're all behind it, but it's just enabling those that just are lazy and don't want to participate, which is tough.
Yeah, when those brands came out with those statements, the CEO of the packaging company I worked for at the time came to me and was like, I need some numbers on this. I need to understand, like, what does this actually mean? And it took me about 30 seconds to figure out exactly what I wanted to say to him. And I said, well, if the first CPG, the first, like, let's call it Kraft, for example, if the first large consumer brand or packaged good company hits this 30% or 25% recycle rate, that more than takes up the entirety of the PCR supply in the US. So exactly. This isn't going to happen.
Right.
It's not logical. It doesn't work. Right. Now, I would love that capacity to be higher. That would be a nice net benefit. And that would have been something, because when you talk to people in California, they say they have to be really aggressive, because if they're really aggressive, that will create systemic change in the recycling infrastructure, and it will make everything better. I thought the same thing would happen when these brands got involved and they said they wanted to hit 20% or 25% recycle rate by 2025. I figured that meant, all right, so now I'm going to see some investment in infrastructure, because these folks are going to need this. I didn't see $1 invested in the system by any of the brands.
Right.
Now, that's what EPR is supposed to solve. The brands are going to have to pay into it. But is that the best way to incentivize this? Do we have to have a legislative angle to make this work? What do you think?
Well, I mean, one of the indicators that I saw as to how some of the bigger resin manufacturers were looking to pivot was before the election, you saw a lot of the big guys positioning themselves almost like calling dibs on PCR with the thought that just maybe, depending on which way the election went, there might have been resin production caps. So by technically calling dibs on, recycled content, that at least gave them grades that they could continue to sell throughout the year, especially if they have something that gets capped prematurely, or if the government really got aggressive about on how much they were allowed to actually produce. That ended up obviously not being the case, and obviously it's a lot more relaxed conversation. But it did kind of give everyone an idea of which direction things would go and who would position themselves to financially benefit from, capturing all of this volume and then turn it into something great. Now, these polymer centers that are starting to pop up, and I think Republic might be on like their third or their fourth. There is still a benefit there. Now, will they need it? Obviously not in the same way, because, resin caps obviously aren't happening, but it still positions them in a spot where they're going to be able to take advantage of those manufacturers out there that are at some point in time going to need to source secondary. And as it gets certified through the different the different organizations, things like that, it starts to meet all these different requirements as far as how clean it is, how pure the stream is, and all that other good stuff. It's still a great long game investment, because this isn't going away, but it's just not going to be necessarily the same as fast of an ROI, because I think it is going to take time for this to ramp up. But as long as we can all be boots on the ground and show, yes, not only the environmental benefit, but the financial benefit, I think that's going to eventually, over time, more players are going to get into the game beyond just trash haulers and stuff like that. So
let's talk a little bit about the Republic Plastic Centers. It was my understanding that a Department of Energy grant was involved in the funding for that, which I think is now that program's dead in the water from my understanding currently. So I think that's another argument that people use against plastics all the time, specifically plastic recycling, is that there's not enough demand or value generated for there to be investments made in this. So I've been long talking about the need for secondary sortation, hub and spoke systems where you're bringing in 3 through 7 bales, mining them, and then separating those out and creating high quality bales, which that's what Republic's doing. And that's what a couple other people are doing. And I think there's true value in that. But the question always becomes, why are we not investing as an industry our own capital into this? And I think a lot of it always comes back to there's just an unclear picture on demand on the backside, because that's the one thing I run into a lot is I have countless conversations with brands about PCR. I want PCR. Give me all the PCR you can get. Well, here's the price. I don't want to pay that. Well, that's what the price is, because that every step in the chain, there's additional energy and everything. This isn't just a plastics problem. It's a paper, glass, whatever. Whatever's recycled is going to typically cost more if it goes to curbside, just because of the additional freight and everything else, and the infrastructure that has to run through. Post-industrial is a different argument altogether. because you don't have all those 6 steps in between. You typically can cut out a lot of that. So I just don't know how we solve for that. And that's where my brain has been running a mile a minute, because I love what the Brave guys are doing. They're connecting the pieces in each region, making sure they cut out as much of the fat as they can. But that really doesn't always solve the end market demand side of that equation. And I really would love for us all, as like, I'm not going to call myself an expert. Well, we'll talk about Rick Demko's of the world coming together to solve this. Because that, to me, is logistics is where recycling lives and dies. Demand is where projects live and die. Because if the projects don't happen because they can't get commitment on the back end that somebody's going to be there to buy it, we're still in the same boat. EPR can possibly solve that. But then you just have an asset that isn't necessarily going to go anywhere. Like, if nobody's committing to buy it in the back end, what do we do? Like, we can put as much infrastructure as you want. What do you think about all?
Well, I think another big boost to that situation and circumstance is how fast technology is improving. You look at the pure loop systems, things like that, where in years past, you'd have material go into somebody that's got to shred it and granulate it, and then it's got to go into somebody that's potentially pelletizing it and preparing it, pre-coloring it, and all that good stuff. And now technology is starting to figure out ways to, shorten these steps, because, like you say, freight is kind of like sales tax. Like, it's got to be paid by somebody somehow, some way, and it's not getting any cheaper. All these things can, especially in commodity resins, it's just the opportunity is to capitalize is just, margins are skinny,
yes.
At best. And like you say, when you're talking, PCR, that's gone through a MRF or something like that, I mean, the deck is already stacked against you. But I think the more technology catches up with these, because I think right now, I think we probably have the most laser focused effort that we've ever experienced in our lifetime with recycling. Engineers are finding different materials, new technology. You look at Gray Parrot and Tomra, all these, that just the sorting is just getting way more accurate. Like, back in the day when I first got into recycling, it's like 1 to 3% contamination, cross contamination by volume was the standard. Now you think, who in the heck is going to buy something with 1 to 3%, a 1,500 pound box with
1% max? I still see, but exactly. 3%, no chance.
Exactly. You're making trash at that point. If you're not better than that, then you may as well just get out of the game, or, let somebody else handle it that's invested more than Exactly. You're better off just, size reduce so you're not getting killed on freight, and then move it to somebody that has the technology. Mm-hmm. But again, I think, as competition in the machinery and all that stuff, drives costs down, and the understanding that the investments in this equipment is, usually decades long. I mean, this stuff is, a lot of the stuff from the old guys, is nearly bulletproof. I mean, if you really are good about keeping metal out of it, depending on, and if you're buying the right equipment, that's the other thing that's key is, what type of shredder do I need? Do I need a single rotor? Do I need a 4 rotor? How am I granulating? Understanding, ferrous and non-ferrous, like, how do you deal with all these things? It's just understanding.
You lost like 75% of the sustainability people that listen to this show. Just talking ferrous, non-ferrous, and granulation.
Right, sorry, my bad.
No. My point is that people don't know about recycling, and those are simple things that if you're in recycling, you have to know those terms, mm-hmm. or you're dead in the water.
Right.
Because if you don't know the difference between the metal types, magnet's not going to do you any good trying to get the stuff out of there.
Exactly.
You can run it over a magnet as many times as you want, and it's 100%. Not going to do anything.
100%.
So these are the things you have to know about if you want to solve these problems. And that's why whenever I talk to anybody that wants to get into recycling or sustainability, I say spend as much time as you can around a MRF. Spend as much time as you can in a company that is wholly reliant on recycled content for its feedstock. And then you will learn what you need to know in order to make the difference you want to make. Because if you don't know those things, you can have theories, you can have thoughts on how you think you can solve things. And then we're right in the California situation where you're putting together solutions that are not solving the problem.
Right. Right. Or to your point, you could be creating other problems down the line. You might be, fixing something on the front end, but you might be destroying something on the back end.
You destroyed an end market that was working perfectly well by solving for something that really didn't need to be solved in the first place.
Correct. We had countless conversations where I was at before. We were grinding lots of structurally foamed HDPE, very common in knockdown dunnage and all that good stuff. And I mean, I'm talking like, we had a shredding and granulation line that would kick out 1,500 pounds every 6.5 minutes. So super high volume horsepower line. And we thought all the time, it's like, because of how the granulator worked and there was, a little bit of fines in it and some other stuff like that. And we thought, okay, well, maybe it would be beneficial to, repro something like this and capture the fines content and all that other stuff. And when we went to our end sale that was buying basically blanket POs for months and months and months of all the structural foam we could produce, they're saying, why would you repro it? Like, that's not of no benefit to us. So that if you want to do it for style points, go ahead. But our systems are already set up to work with it in regrind form, and we're 100% happy with that. So again, it's
one leg, less heat history, it's less energy. There's so many reasons. But if you're not having the conversation with a customer and you don't understand your end market, you'll never figure that out. And you'll keep wasting money and adding costs where it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, on a commodity resin that you're already struggling to compete with wide spec, that is absolutely saturating the market. Yeah. So again, it's understanding all the nuances of how the recycling ecosystem works, because you got to start right from the generator, understand the freight, what strategies for processing, how are we deconstructing this item that we're trying to recycle, how do we get it into saleable, clean feedstocks, and then where are they ending up and who's the market for it. So
I kind of gave my breakdown on what I tell people if they want to learn about recycling, if they want to get involved and they want to solve problems. What would you give as advice to people who really want to get involved and to help solve these big issues?
Probably one of my best suggestions would be to, whether it be at the company that you work at, big or small, or at a reputable recycling company itself, figure out how to become part of a waste audit. When I used to do waste audits back in the day, you literally start at the compactor and you look at everything that's thrown in there that's a resource, and then you work your way back to the carpet. And then you identify all of the key components. What's being discarded? Where is it generated? How can it be collected? Is it worth collecting? Because sometimes it's not. I mean, sometimes the effort does not support because you're just not creating or generating enough of it. But just go through that with a professional and look at how you identify these opportunities. How do you engage in the proper methods of recovering these resources? And then hopefully that would give a clearer understanding of how you attack these opportunities properly. Because I tell people all the time, the one success story that I had with that OEM that recovered all that polypropylene, they were literally one phone call away or one email away from something being very successful versus something that was costing $70,000 a month.
Yeah.
So, and those are things that actually can really be impactful for a company, and understanding that sometimes, you're better off leaning into professionals and consulting that way, as opposed to just going it, on your own and Googling the heck out of it. And, sometimes that kind of puts you in a bad spot to be taken advantage of.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've looked at like Google search results, because I've been very intrigued by the AI stuff that they've been churning out, and specifically what it was going to say about plastic recycling. I will say it's usually pretty accurate. It's been better than I thought it was going to be. There's still some holes, but at the same time, they're only as good as the information that's put in there. So it's searching the internet, and the cesspool that the internet is, and
unfortunately,
what's true, what's not, like what works, what doesn't. And I think there's no substitute for experience.
Agreed.
And truly having hands-on experience in the way that you're talking. Because I think the waste audit's a great idea. And understanding, like I had Sarah Samuelson on here, and she's taking chip bags and making planters out of them. And she's all about zero waste at her facilities. So she doesn't even have trash cans. And she makes sure she's reusing everything. She's taken that waste audit to a whole different level.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of stuff you can do if you truly understand what's generating the waste. And then there's only one way to figure that out, is by tracking it, to your point, back to the source. And then you figure out, is this a value add activity? Is this something we should be doing? Can we make this better? And then you've got multiple engineers that can solve problems to make it better. And you reduce waste. And that's really what we all want to do. Like that, we can make money doing this. We can make money in recycling. But most people that I've talked to that are in recycling by choice, that they're not like a second generation in a business or something, they're in this because they actually want to make this a better place. Like they do want to solve problems. That's the only reason why I do this. I could do thousands of other things and not have the headaches that I have and the arguments with people online, but I just love the people. And I love the fact that our products are better environmentally when you look at it from a GHG perspective. They can be recycled, and they are being recycled, but we need to do more of it. And that's what drives me. That's why I want to do this. Yeah. And I think you're kind of in that same boat, 100%. Which is exactly why Mitch at Brave said, you guys need to talk. So.
Yeah. I'm still, he and I still need to sort out the tribal knowledge thing, because it's so funny. When he had first mentioned it, I felt like it was like a Mr. Miyagi moment. Like you're this old ancient guy in a robe somewhere, talking about how to recycle plastic. So
but it's a real concern. Like, so I've been in this industry about 10 years. And I can name probably 5 people that I know that if you combine those 5 people and you put them in a room, you got more than enough knowledge on recycling to be dangerous, to like really make some big changes. And I think maybe that's what we're missing. Like we've got PRC, which is great. I go every year. It's a great way to interact, but we're not really all sitting together and brainstorming about how to solve these things. Like the Brave guys are trying to do that in the way that they're operating, but I think we got to get bigger in how we talk about this as an industry and come together to solve, or we're going to still be in the same boat 5, 10, 15 years from now, because everybody's got their piece of the pie and they don't want to give up their piece of the pie. So they've got their little bit of knowledge here, but if we can all come together, we all make more money if we all solve this. It's not socialism either. It's just like, hey, how do we work together to make this system work in the way that it should? And that's really what I'm invested in here. And I think what I'd love to do, I've talked about this a couple times. I want to have a roundtable discussion with some of those experts and have a big conversation about this. Maybe we record it. Maybe we don't. Maybe it's not for a podcast. Maybe it's just a discussion about how we can make this better. I don't know. I think I would love to have you involved in that. And then maybe a couple others that I'm sure they understand that they're going to get reached out to after they listen to this. But what do you think about that? Do you think we can do that? Do you think this industry can work together well enough to actually solve these things?
I think so. And I think I'm hoping what was a major indicator of that is when I was at that packaging recycling summit in Anaheim last year. It was when the PG guys were talking about their toothpaste tube. Mm-hmm. And they said, look, we're going to share this with the industry. We're not going to keep it tight, close to vest and say, hey, look at how great we are because we came out with this all HDPE, toothpaste tube.
I still don't know how they're going to recycle that thing, but that's a different argument altogether.
Yeah. But what I liked about their message was this isn't about money. This is about the greater good. And this is about collaboration for success. And I'm hoping out of all of this, real conversations can be had where the money aspect of it is removed. So we can at least say, let's look at solutions first, like identify real solutions, and then take a look at what it's going to take. Because again, when you're talking about a collaborative effort should be a lot more cost-effective discussion than individual people trying to figure out how they can make money doing it or how they can even just survive doing it. Because each company has their strengths. And like when I vet a new, recycling processor for my network, I always tell them, let's jump on a call. Tell me what your lane looks like.
Yeah.
What are your strengths? What are you processing most? Are you an olefin guy? Are you an engineered resins guy? Like where you're at, what's keeping your doors open? And then the more I can understand that will give me a better understanding of what is your technology investments? What is it? What are you going after? Because I'm not going to bother sending you, offers for different fleet loads for, like say, engineered grade materials if it's just cross contamination to all of your product lines. Maybe you've got big horsepower lines like I had, or maybe you have, small individual lines because, you need to keep natural. So you can't run anything color through there. So you have this small stack system, that can still run purge, but you're needing to keep natural. So you can't run anything else through there. Or, how are you, how are you set up? What are the tools? What does your toolbox look like? And then how can I help work together?
Yeah,
exactly. Because I think at the end of the day, that is the most common message. People that are in the recycling industry most likely aren't in it because of the money. There's typically not exactly. It's typically not money first. It's typically for the greater good first, and then wow, there are benefits to this, and I think that we can at least, we're not all eating filet mignon, but at least we're eating chicken, right?
Yeah.
Everybody can keep the doors open. Exactly.
So I've already pissed off this group once or twice, so I'm gonna do it again. Honestly, APR is abdicating its responsibility here. They should be the ones driving this. They've got all the people. They can put them all together, and they can truly solve a lot of this stuff if it was directed in the right way. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to leave it at that because I've already made them angry a couple times. But I just think that if we've got a group that's talking about an association for plastics recyclers and they're not out there solving the biggest issues that are here, and just the simple stuff that we're talking about, which don't have simple solutions, but at the same time, if the industry came together, it would solve all this. That's abdication in my mind. And it's just needs to be said.
Well, at least to facilitate, like you say, gathering, a handful of the key players and say, okay, like cutting all the details that we all feel are unfeasible aside. Let's get down to brass tacks. What are we working with volume wise? How do we best utilize that, that volume, whatever it is? And then how do we collectively work together to capture more of it and get more of it back into the pipeline? Because that's the greater good. Keep it out of the landfill and stop all these naysayers saying that, it can't be recovered. Recycling doesn't work. Like, I think we're all just really tired of hearing that.
Yeah.
And if that was truly, in fact, the case, the plant that I was at would not have had the doors open for that company has actually been in business for over 100 years. So, it's just, we know it works. It's just time to just stop wasting energy on the argument and let's get more focused on the solutions.
Could not agree more. I think that's a great way to end it. I've already kept you for an hour and 10 minutes. And Rick, this has been great. That's exactly the kind of conversation I want to have. I give everybody the opportunity when they come on this show. Is there anything specific you want to plug? How do people get in touch with you? And anything like that?
Well, really, to be honest, I don't really have anything specific. To me, this conversation is more about the solutions than it is a business advantage. I'm just here. I'm more than happy to have conversations on opportunities like this where we can share knowledge, because I really feel like the education part is really lacking. And I think best practices, how do we, find solutions together, I think is what's key. And really, to be honest, I don't want the business side of it to slight, credibility here. I'm not looking to financially benefit from any of this. I'm looking to, help people find their own success stories and put themselves in better positions to succeed in this, because I think we all benefit from it.
Yeah. And if you want to find him, you can find him mixing it up in my comment section on LinkedIn. Rick Demko. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope to do this again. I'd like to have like the roundtable discussion, like I said, but I'd also like to have you back whenever there's some new fangled thing that comes up on plastic recycling, because I think you can bring some real world knowledge to that discussion that there are very few people that can. So
yeah, well, I just appreciate the opportunity. Like I say, hopefully some value came of this for your audience. And yeah, I'd love to participate, whenever you're willing to have me.
Awesome. Well, this has been the Redefining Plastics Podcast. My name is Justin Riney for Rick Demko. Thank you so much. You want to learn more about the plastics industry, recycling, check out these other videos, please like and subscribe.